Yeah, it's good stuff.
That reminds me of like what we were talking about earlier with like nothing in the game tells you you're making a bad decision. And I don't want to call out Stay Safe because like I'm actually like really enjoying his stream. Like even if he stops playing Guild Wars 2, I'll keep watching because he's pretty entertaining. But like he's playing Scepter Necro, which is good, but he's like playing with all power stats, and like nothing is telling him that like he's gimping his damage in like that Scepter does like fuck all power damage, and that his stats aren't helping the Condis tick harder.
Do you think there's a way how okay? Honestly, I think that is a really good point. This is honestly one of the biggest points out there. A lot of people play weapons that and then have bad stats for that. How do you do that? Do you think you could actually have almost like on the tooltip for Scepter, it says how powery it is or how conditioning it is?
I don't know.
What's the way to deal with that? Because I think you're absolutely right.
The solution is giving level up rewards that function as a whole, like function as like a complete package. Like
BRB.
The best Scepter, like say you hit level 20, you're gonna get a level 20 Scepter or whatever, and it's gonna just come with Condi stats. Like, but that would be specific to a Necro leveling up. Like you'd have to like make the level up experience like the level up rewards like on a like. But
what if they get?
Basis.
What if they?
It doesn't even matter because it's so hard because like Guardian, like do you want like Scepter could be Condi or power? Like it's so.
Would you change it so that the drops you get have stats that are appropriate to the weapon on that specific profession? Because the thing is, yeah, you could have level up rewards, right? But what if you then drop a Scepter that's Berserker on Necromancer, for example?
It's hard.
Would you actually set it so if you're... No, the trouble with that is because that means that it would have different value, right? Like, so different... There'll be like an optimal spec to farm on, essentially, because, you know, the stats change the value of the item. So you can't do that. Yeah, oh, God, it's super weird, actually. Like, what do you do about this? Do you... I think the only way...
Don't they have weapons that level up with you now?
They do, yeah, but again,
they do.
How does that prevent people from making bad decisions? I don't think there's actually, like, that doesn't make people make... That doesn't prevent someone from playing... Or rather, it doesn't tell them that playing power on Necroscepter is bad, right? If that makes any sense. It doesn't say that. And you could still... the player could still get into the same trap. Yeah, I agree that it would help it. It would make it better, guys. But there's still nothing in the game outside of...
It just doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, maybe you like... Honestly, while you're
maybe at level 80 it matters. Like,
yeah, because while you're leveling, honestly, Power Scepter is fine. Like, it's not gonna like fuck you, right? You're not gonna get screwed by that, so maybe that's fine.
Like, so like I've been pushing for a while for them to update the level 80 boost box to like give you like a legitimate build that you can actually play and not get like memed on. But I also want those same whatever you get in the level 80 box. By the time you hit 80, you've gotten that same gear from leveling. So that you have a cohesive build whether you boosted or whether you didn't boost.
And that works assuming people actually use the gear, right?
Yeah, but I mean, chances are you're not gonna, like... a lot of people ping me their build who fight the frog, and I see that they only have the exotics that they leveled up on, that they got like with like the one with Grenth Rune that you get from leveling up, and then, you know, like it's very random that the ones you get from level up rewards. If they would use it if they were given a full set.
But how would they know it was the right set to use, though?
Well, if it's tailored to their class, like the way it is in a level up boost, or the way it should be in the level up boost, well, it wouldn't give them the option to be bad.
You know, I mean, yeah, sure. But what if they say, oh, you know, this is some nice gear, but then they say, you know what? I don't like Scepter. I'm going to play Axe. And now they've got a Condi armor set, and they're using an Axe.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think the only way you do this is you actually have to actually mark weapons as power or Condi. But dude, this is the... Oh my god! Oh! Dude, this is like... This, guys, is the true fucking hell of Guild Wars 2. Because, guys, look, what am I doing right now? I'm playing power Scepter in World versus World on Necromancer, and this is correct as well. And even worse, I'm taking a Condi trait line because my role isn't damage. My role is essentially utility in well, it's a bit of damage, but it's essentially a utility role in World versus World, right? Like, this is the real fuckery. And also, I think Stay Safe, he probably isn't aware of the distinction. And by the way, this is because he's a WoW player, right? I can almost guarantee this is what's going on here. I guarantee you, he thinks power makes conditions do more damage, by the way. 100%. Because if you have spell power in World of Warcraft, spell power, that's what it's called, that will increase your dot damage and your direct damage, right? So if you cast a Shadow Bolt and say Curse of Agony is a dot, and then Shadow Bolt's a direct damage, then it will actually increase the damage of both of those. So I can almost guarantee you, unless he specifically looked at the way the abilities work and the way the stats work here, almost guarantee you that he would. And actually, by the way, I wouldn't even blame him. Like, if you come from WoW, you would actually expect power to behave that way. Like, you wouldn't expect there to be a separate stat for dots and direct damage. You wouldn't expect that because that's not how it is in World of Warcraft or any other game, really, right? Like, there's no, like, dot damage stat elsewhere, right? It's going to be, like, all linked to one thing. Like, damage is going to be linked to one stat there as well. Hey, Muzzer, thanks for the prime, man. And this is the true hell of Guild Wars 2, guys, because the reason why you make certain decisions is non-trivial, right? And that's the issue. Okay, that is the big issue there, in my opinion.
I mean, Ada MR, for sure he's seen gear that has the words condition damage on it, but, like, you have to stop and, like, think about what you're seeing. And if you don't stop and think about what you're seeing, like, it just goes in one ear and out the other. Like obviously anyone who picks up the game is going to go, okay, power, damage, good. They're not going to, like, and if
Serrano Bros is the prime. Hit those subs, lads. Tier 1s, tier 2s, primes, gifted.
You're not going to, like, think too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be super clear here, guys, it is super easy for us to say, oh, I can't believe he wouldn't know that. Or I can't believe, like, a new player wouldn't know that, right?
I made mistakes just like that when I was new.
Everyone did, guys. Like, it's super easy to say this once you actually know, right? But if you've got no idea, dude, there's a lot going on in Guild Wars 2, particularly compared to, later on, other MMOs, right? Other MMOs are much more streamlined, right? A lot of modern MMOs are really fucking streamlined these days, right? So it is really, really difficult to actually kind of get into. And this is a really big problem, guys, okay? Because you can say that, oh, how can people be this big dum-dum? Well, the thing is, guys, is that it doesn't matter if you find it incredulous. You being incredulous doesn't actually make it not a problem. A lot of people really struggle, right? A lot of people really struggle with this stuff and find it difficult to understand, or just very unintuitive, right? Or not even unintuitive, just they don't know if they're making a good or a bad decision because of the way weapons work. Like, there can be, like, some really weird stuff going on with, like, what weapon choices you make, like, what trait choices you might make to do certain things. It's very, very non-trivial in how everything, like, fits together, I think. But I don't know, that's just my take.
Yeah, I mean, so when I first started playing, like, just like Cutgrass said, like, I was, like, instinctively for Berserker gear, because I was like, okay, what's the most damage gear stat? That's what I'm going to play. And there wasn't really, like, Sinister or Viper, so there was no, like, Condi gear stat that actually was, like, a max damage Condi stat. Like you had Rabid and Rampagers, but neither one of those was, like the best damage that you could do. Neither one of those was, like, the Berserker. You know what I mean? Like, where it was just, like, tailor-made. But there was a point where, like, in my head, I was like, okay, well, I do have bleed on crit, and I noticed just from, like, looking at, like, recordings of fights that, like, maybe, like, 10% of my damage was coming from bleeding, even on, like, a full Greatsword Berserker power build. And I was like, well, if 10% of my damage is coming from bleeding, then 10% of my gear should have Condi damage on it. That was like a thought that went through my head, because you just don't know things like that you don't know that that's a bad idea until you, like, really, like, think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I get that. I think, players can definitely be led to that conclusion, and conclusions like that, right? I think you can essentially get to that point as you continue to learn, for sure. But I think, I mean, Well, for example, like you, and I imagine Cut Grass or whoever was saying this also has a similar story here as well. But you kind of had to say a history in this type of analysis, right? Because you played Guild Wars 1, like PvP hardcore, right, before Guild Wars 2, and I don't know, like other players might have played, you know, at a pretty high level before, maybe you know, they played World of Warcraft or they played something else, like some other kind of game there, and had a similar experience. But the thing is, I think that people need to get into the mindset of, imagine you've never played an MMO before, right? Like that is like where, and that's where a lot of people are as well, funny enough, because I think that's where a lot of people actually find themselves, as like never having ever had any experience with any system like this, right? And I think that is a much more, I guess, relatable perspective to come from, because like that is actually the situation for a lot of people, right? Like that is how it is, very commonly.
Yeah. Yeah, most people, like, their first RPG is probably like an Elder Scrolls single player game or like a Zelda. And then an MMO is like a step up from that in terms of like complexity and mechanics and stuff.
Exactly. They have combi damage up to 1,000 as you level like power. Well, I mean, the thing is, no, that's not the point, guys. Like, the point is that how do you know, like, what traits, you know, without, like, really getting into it and, like, reading all of them, like, pretty in-depth, like, there's nothing there's nothing inherently conditiony about a scepter, right? Because here's the thing. You might say, oh, it's got loads of combis on it. Well, look at a weapon like Elementalist Staff. Elementalist Staff actually has a lot of combis on it too, right? What about that? Like, and thing is, yeah, you can say that some weapons are very obviously power. They're very obviously combi. That's absolutely right. You'd be correct in saying that. But the issue is that there's so much gray area, right? And there's so much... There are so many exceptions to rules in the game that I don't think you can really say, oh, you know, just read the tooltips. Because there will be so many times where the obvious choice is actually the wrong choice, right? Or, you know, it can be very varied and very situational on how, what you're actually supposed to do, right?
Especially with Scepter on Necro. It has Condis on the auto attack and stuff, right? Or but they also have power. It also has direct damage on it too, you know? So yeah, your auto attack has a bleed, but it also has a direct damage. If you're new, you don't know that direct damage number is small, like, because it's all like you have no
reference. You have no point.
Yeah, no reference to compare to.
Yeah,
and you don't know that bleed is really fucking good. Like to you, it's just like, okay, it's one bleed. Why am I going to really base my whole build around one bleed? The answer is yes, but you don't know that. Like.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. Because, and the thing is, you almost don't want to get rid of this that much. Because everyone here is going to rightly say that, yeah, this is what makes the game interesting and makes the game beautiful. And you'd be right in saying this. But, you know, you also, when you're dealing with something like this, guys, and something has a drawback, and when something's got pros and cons, what is your goal? Well, your goal is to maximize the pros and minimize the cons, right? You want the pros to be as good as possible, and you want the... you want the cons to be either as irrelevant as possible or just nowhere near as impactful, right? Like that's the goal in the system. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're actually talking about. We're talking about finding ways to make the good parts better and the bad parts not as bad. You talk to people in other games. Yeah, you can say this, but people don't do this. Dude, welcome to the way people engage with games, right? People don't do this. And weirdly enough, they didn't do it back in the day either. Like when you're playing, you know, people in WoW Classic, dude, like everyone sucked at that game when it was originally out because, yeah, like people were not super interested in like learning how the game actually works, right? That's just the way it is. But I don't know, that's another thing entirely.
Well, and there's also like, yes, people could learn it from other players or from YouTube or just from trial and error. But you get to the point where it's like there's also, you want players to learn these things before it becomes a frustration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like if it gets to the point where they're like, I'm frustrated and I don't know what to do, you're already like 1 foot out the door for a new player.
Exactly.
So they whichever way you intend for them to learn the mechanics, it has to be timed so that it happens before frustration sets in.
Yeah, exactly.
Luckily, Guild Wars 2 is like story and open world is easy enough that you can kill Zaitan and get to level 80 long before frustration will set in, unless you fight Big Nose Ted.
Yeah, well, that's where that's where you got to draw the line, right? Big nose Ted, dude,
Yeah.
that's fucked up, right? That's way too far. Like, and I think the issue here as well is that, well, in a way, I guess the downside of that also is that, yeah, you get hours out of it, but I think the second that you leave kind of the warm embrace of that content, and say you head into PvP, or you head into World versus World, or you go for a raid or something like that, you immediately get annihilated, right? Because the second that you don't have this, slightly easier content that where your decisions aren't that important, and you move into a game mode where actually all those things that you don't understand are really important, that's when it really gets messed up, right? Like, that's where everything goes horribly wrong, because all of a sudden those things that the player doesn't necessarily understand, like, those are now vitally important, and if you don't understand them, you'll never win, right? Like, you literally cannot win unless you learn these concepts and, like, figure out how this stuff actually works. Yeah, PvP, like, I think that's going to be good. Like, getting into the end game is where the game really starts to open up. It's the leveling experience in Guild Wars 2 is very weird. I think some people really like it, but I can definitely understand some people really not liking it as well. It's very different to what you might expect if you played something else, particularly something like Retail WoW. It's like very, very weird, very non-linear, right? That's not something you see very often anymore. It is quite remarkable that it still is as it is. Judge... Do you think they would ever do what they did in Guild Wars 1, by the way? And actually make it so that you have this new starter zone, right? New starter zone
That's what I really wanted them to
in
do
the expansion.
in End of Dragons.
Yeah, that's what I
really
wanted
them to do that.
Yeah, I think that would be
Just
so good, actually.
Because, like I've said it before, like, the issue right now is, let's say you have, like, a ton... Like, let's say WoW is still in the shitter in February. The hype has already died on Final Fantasy, the Final Fantasy X pack. So there's going to be people that try out End of Dragons. Do you really want them? Do you want those new people to be in Queensdale? I don't think you do. You
want them in End of Dragons.
Yeah, exactly. But do you also want every new player to boost? Like, that's probably the best option, but it's not a great option. You should want them to level, but it would require End of Dragons having its own leveling zone, and I think, like, do it, like, very accelerated. Like, maybe you get, like, 8 little quests, and each quest gives you, like, 10 levels or something like that. But
yeah,
I don't know. Like, make it fast, but still, like, a leveling experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be good. And yeah, I look, honestly, like, we're not to talk about him too much, guys, okay? Let him do his thing, right? Stay safe as a WoW Classic player. Trust me, he ain't quitting if something gets a bit frustrating or annoying. Believe me, okay?
Yeah.
Like, he ain't quitting.
Right mentality, for sure.
Yeah, if WoW Classic doesn't break you, there's no way in fuck there's no way that this game could ever break you. Like, everything in that game is so much more annoying and, like, gimmicky and weird than you'll ever really be experiencing, to be honest, elsewhere.